Let's talk today about materials that you need to draw realistically with coloured pencils. Now, I can use a huge variety of different materials, but there's only really a few that I would say are absolutely essential. I've got all sorts of tools that can help me create extra details with coloured pencils, but for the core materials, I would say I have probably 6. So let's go through these essential materials today. Now, first up, reasonably obviously, the first material I need for all of my colour pencil drawings is a set of coloured pencils. Now, I tend to draw with 2 main brands of pencils. I draw with both Polychromos coloured pencils and Prismacolor. These are both high quality coloured pencils designed for professional use. By that I mean they're really nice and blendable, generally very easy to apply, and particularly with the Polychromos, they have a good light fast rating, meaning they won't fade as much over time. That said, I don't believe you need to have really expensive coloured pencils to make amazing drawings. You can make really beautiful pictures with something like Crayola. I think particularly if you're a beginner, it's a bit easier if you can get a slightly larger set, a set of 36 for example. A set of 36 of Crayola I think would be easier to create a beautiful drawing than with a set of 12 Prismacolor. Now, once you've got a set of pencils, the next material you need to think about is the paper. And I find time and time again, people just try and draw on printer paper or sketch paper, and it's going to be very difficult to create really realistic drawings on these papers. The whole key to drawing with colored pencil is that the colors need building up in a series of light layers. We need to put down some lighter colors, gradually get darker, building up that vibrancy of color and mixing them together on the paper. Because we have to put down so many layers of pencil, something like printer paper or sketch paper just can't take those layers. Now, I like using something called Bristol board. This is a really nice and smooth paper, which is actually pretty thick. It's almost as thick as a sheet of card. I find on a paper like this, it makes all of the difference, and it does enable you to build up those layers. You get a much more vibrant color. I always say if you only want to spend out on one thing, make it the paper rather than the pencils. It's easier to create a beautiful drawing on the right kind of paper with cheaper pencils than it is with professional pencils and really cheap paper. Now, I'm pleased to say this video is sponsored by Skillshare. I am primarily a colored pencil artist, but being an artist, I do sometimes like to experiment with some new materials. At the moment, I am trying for the first time some acrylic paint painting. And whenever I want to learn a new skill like this, Skillshare is always my first port of call. There are so many classes to help me figure out a new medium. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, art, and so many different categories. Skillshare can help you take your skills, hobbies, and passions to the next level. Now, as well as being a member on Skillshare, I am also a teacher, and I absolutely love the community feel to Skillshare. You can see other people's creations from each of the classes. Now, the first 500 people to click the link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Now, we've talked about pencils and paper. Next up, let's think about sharpness. You may think this isn't hugely important, but getting back to layering, because we need to build the pencil up in a series of light layers, this is 10 times easier with a sharp pencil. Now, you don't need any sort of particularly fancy pencil sharpeners, just anything that creates a really sharp point. I have a hand crank pencil sharpener. I particularly like that I can change the blade rather than throwing the whole thing away, but you don't need anything as fancy as this. Next up, now this is probably a optional item really, but I use them so much. This is a pencil extender. Now, I find that when my pencils get down to about halfway, all of a sudden they get very uncomfortable to hold, and I can keep drawing with them, but it does hurt my hand. So what I use is this pencil extender. blender, I can just screw it onto the end of the pencil and it makes it feel like it's a full length pencil. It makes it 10 times more comfortable, and it means that my pencils are getting down to this sort of size before I bin them. It would be pretty much impossible to draw with them at this size. The next colored pencil supply is actually not something you can buy. This is something that needs to be made. This is some color swatches. This is where I draw out every color in my set from as light as I can go to as dark as I can go, and then I label it. And what that does is shows me exactly what those colors actually look like on the paper, preferably the paper that I am going to draw on, so Bristol board. I frequently find that the lead of the pencil and the barrel of the pencil isn't an exact match for what that pencil actually looks like. It makes selecting colors 10 times easier if I have these swatches. I would be completely lost without them. Now, they are quite time consuming to make, but it's not something that needs to be done constantly. In fact, the swatches that I use are at least 5 years old. When I look at these reds, for example, they are so similar, I don't think it would be possible for me to select the correct one without seeing what they actually look like. Now, the final material that I use in all of my colored pencil drawings is some way of looking at the reference photo. Because I draw realistically, I am always working from a reference. I find it's very difficult to create something that is going to look super realistic from just your mind. And I need some way of looking at that reference photo. So I generally draw off of my iPad. I particularly like that I can zoom in to see all of the little details. But it doesn't need to be an iPad, just any way of looking at the reference photo. You could always print out the reference. So those are the essential materials I use for every colored pencil drawing. There are other materials that I do occasionally use, like for example jelly roll pens and craft knives, but that is a conversation for a different video. Now, I mentioned earlier in this video about layering, about building up those pencils. If you'd like to learn more about layering, check out this video here. I go through in much more detail and you can see me put it into practice with the pair. Happy drawing, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.